So that is a summary of learning analytics. How you now use that in your own teaching will depend upon the technologies that emerge over the next few years and how you can engage with the data that's collected about your students and that you collect about your students to improve both your teaching and your students' learning. Now, in mobile learning, and particularly the ways we go about teaching with mobile devices or mobile learning pedagogies, this leads on from various other approaches we've used in other modules to look at how we can engage students through the use of technology. So the first is the one-to-one learning environments. Here we can use students having laptops or iPads or other devices to improve their learning. But the big emphasis in one-to-one is, of course, that every student has access to their own device, or there are collective sets of devices that every student has got access to. Now, in the past we've had computer labs or sets of computers that students could have access to, but they didn't all have access to them, and they didn't all have access to them at the same time or all the time. Now, Australia actually led the world in terms of the first school that had a one-to-one laptop system, and that was MLC in Melbourne. But a couple of years ago now, in 2008, we had the digital education revolution, where the federal government provided funding for every single school to have every student from years 9 to 12 have their own device. Now, schools chose different devices. Some did, or the majority did, laptop programs. Some did iPad programs. Some just had more computer labs. But every student from year 9 to 12 could have all the time access to a computing device. Now, since then, we've had a drop in funding and emphasis. So not all schools now have got funding to maintain that. So many schools are looking at different ways to fund that. And we've got the BYOD, or Bring Your Own Device programs. But basically the cost is being shifted generally to parents, whereby parents will now be expected to ensure that their children have access to a device and can then bring that either to school or through school levies or other funding mechanisms. Students will be expected, or parents will be expected to contribute to the cost of providing that one-to-one access. Now, it hasn't quite happened all the way through to primary schools. Certainly there are many primary schools that are going to one-to-one, particularly where they've got an associated high school or they're part of a larger school where they've got a one-to-one initiative. But that's where things will probably be going over the next few years, where more and more primary schools, parents are also expected to provide their students with a device. Either it's by a whole school organised laptop program, where they might lease or purchase a laptop through the school. Many schools have gone for the cheaper iPad version of the same initiative, and some are even going for other tablets, which we'll talk about in a moment. Now, the One Laptop Per Child initiative helped prompt this change in education, whereby there was a big initiative to provide one-to-one laptops to every child in the third world. So the idea was that they would have a laptop that would cost less than $100, and these would be provided to third world countries so that every child there would have access to a computing device and the internet. And that's been fairly successful. There's a number of countries around the world whereby they do have those fully deployed. There's around about 5,000 deployed in Australia to our remote Indigenous communities, where there was seen as a particular need. And that tended to prompt the rest of the world to say, well, if we're giving one-to-one computing to third world countries, then we should probably also have one-to-one computing in our first world classrooms. So there's been a whole big push around the globe to have mobile learning implemented in schools, or one-to-one, which tended to be mobile devices, laptops and tablet devices. So there's a range of video clips there that you should look at and see what one-to-one and mobile learning represents to different people. But the big initiative, or the big changer to all this, has been tablet computers. Now, laptops used to cost more than desktop computers. In fact, I can remember when they used to cost 2 to 3 times as much as a desktop computer did. And that really happened up until the development of the one-to-one laptop, or one laptop per child program. It really showed the world that we could produce laptops much, much cheaper. And since then, the price of laptops has been dropping dramatically. And now laptops are cheaper generally than personal computers, and are dropping even more in price, particularly as we had what became known as a netbook, which was a laptop that just worked on the internet. But in 2010, things changed dramatically again with the development of the iPad. A very, very cheap device that had quite a long battery life and was seen as very, very useful for use in schools, where generally we couldn't afford to give every child a laptop or a desktop computer, but we could easily provide them all with a tablet computer. So we didn't have to worry then about infrastructure in terms of PowerPoints and desks, changing our desks and all the rest that would involve having computer labs, and they weren't as expensive as laptop computers. So rolling out tablet devices was seen as a very effective solution. And it also happened to be just below the price point whereby schools needed external approval to purchase them. Of course, to put in a new computer lab or even to run a big laptop program was fairly expensive, and there were central mechanisms to control how schools went about that. But tablet devices weren't seen quite as being like computers. So schools didn't need to get external approval, and principals didn't need to go through a whole lot of processes in order to have those deployed in their schools. They could make their own local decisions about that. And so we've seen a huge proliferation of tablets amongst our primary schools. In fact, there's many, many schools here on the Gold Coast now whereby they've got one-to-one tablet deployments in their primary schools, or at least in certain classes. So it's very likely that when you go out onto practicum or you become a teacher, that you will come into a school where the expectation is that every child will use a computing device all the time. Well, not necessarily all the time, but they'll have access to it all the time. There'll be certain times when you may decide not to use it, but there will certainly be a lot of pressure for you to show effective use of those devices. And part of getting employment in those schools will be to show and to convince the principal or the selection committee that you are going to be able to effectively integrate into that school environment, which means you're going to be able to use computing devices in an effective way in the classroom. Now, of course, during this course, you're learning all about how to do that, so hopefully you'll be well prepared. Now, we've talked about mobile devices, we've talked about tablets and laptops and so forth. Before those, we used to have iPods were deployed in some schools, and even before that we had a device called a personal digital assistant, which was sort of like a mobile phone without the phone capabilities. So we've been sort of looking at mobile devices for 15, 20 years now, and how to effectively use them in the classroom. Hasn't really been until we've had tablet devices and laptops become affordable that we've really been able to explore mobile devices. But now also we've got students having mobile phones that have got a lot of computing power. So finally we've been able to actually look at what's known as location-based learning, or mobile learning in its true sense. So this is not just having access to the device. Whoops. But it's actually using the capabilities of the device to be mobile and using that capacity to improve student learning. So what does it mean to have a mobile device? This means that students can move about and move about away from the classroom. So location-based learning, which is sort of being used now because mobile learning's become a rather confused term, but it's looking at how we can actually change student learning and how we go about teaching when students can move about easily, when we can go off campus, we can go on excursions, we can move around a space and take photos and do recordings, and not be tied down to a particular location. So there's a whole range of different approaches for mobile-based learning, and you can read about those in the notes, and a range of different examples, particularly around applications or apps that allow us to do that. So there's a range of different activities. I set up one at a school on the north coast whereby they had a rainforest area, and so we went through and we created a whole series of activity stations throughout this rainforest whereby students with their mobile devices, it would detect when they came within a certain location and then provide them with various tasks and information about that location as they moved through the rainforest. You'll find this very commonly now in many museums and art galleries, where there are location-based learning occurring as you move through that space, where depending upon your location, various information is provided to you and various other activities and learning processes can occur based upon where you are. Now, teachers have set up their own ones in schools, or particularly around the school grounds, whereby as you move around the school ground, various activities and tasks can come about. And for many students, this is very engaging. Of course, they're being able to be more physical and active, and can engage them in the learning process when they can run around the schoolyard doing their learning, not being constrained to the classroom. Then finally, there's other uses of mobile devices, such as social media, Twitter being one of the more popular ones, but of course you've got Facebook and other social media tools whereby students can quickly and easily share information amongst each other about what they're learning. And there's various approaches that are provided there about how you can use social media, or one aspect of social media. So one of the big reasons mobile devices have become so popular is because of mobile apps. Until tablet computers, and particularly the iPad, became popular, we only ever had a few pieces of software that we tended to use, and that was the majority of that was the Microsoft Office suite. Almost 99% of, well, yeah, mostly in schools, probably about maybe 90% of the use of computers was using those applications. Suddenly we had these mobile devices that we could have lots and lots of these small little computer programs installed quickly and easily. And that really changed the way that we started using software again, whereby there was lots and lots of different options available. Some people say there's too many now, but if you want to use a mathematics application, there's literally thousands upon thousands of maths apps that you can go and find that are applicable for use in the classroom. And we're doing a project here at Griffith where we're trying to categorize those mathematics applications and bring some order to the complexity of those that are available in terms of how they can be used for different learning outcomes and different learning approaches. So in one ways, mobile apps have been a great boon, but in other ways they've been a problem because there's now just so many. It's making the teacher's job difficult in sorting out which are most effective for a particular learning outcome that we want to engage with. So you can look at a few of the app ideas there, but not just using apps, of course. Being able to make your own apps has now become very easy. Certainly for web-based apps, you can very quickly and easily make your own apps, make your own storybooks and quick and simple little interactive activities that can be done through apps. And over the next few years, that will probably replace worksheets as we get more and more used to using digital devices, and teachers being able to create their own little apps or sequence of apps will probably replace the more traditional worksheet printed type approach. So I encourage you to have a look at some of those apps and some of the creative ways you can go about using them. There's lots of different app makers now that are available with different levels of complexity, and you can explore some of those. So that's a brief summary of mobile technologies and how, again, an educational technology is being used to transform the way we go about learning in our schooling systems.